Hello and welcome back to another episode of I'll Allow It Nevada, your go-to podcast for insightful glimpses into the Nevada judiciary. I'm your host, Seth Easley, representing the Supreme Court of Nevada Administrative Office of the Courts. In our last episode, we began an informative discussion about the role of court interpreters in the judiciary. So let's jump right back in with our guest, Jessica Escobar, as we continue this very important conversation. So while we're kind of on this topic of kind of the demands of the job, the profession, let's kind of step back a little bit and talk a little bit more about the challenges that this profession faces, court interpreters face.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you want to add on that?
Sure. So I mentioned bilingualism and like a common misunderstanding about what it really takes to be one. And as I like to tell people, would you hire a lawyer who had not passed the bar? Or a doctor who didn't go to medical school but swears that he or she really knows how to do it? Because that's what we do a lot of time in non-professional interpreter settings. Well, this person says that they're bilingual. Let's just trust them with our lives, basically.
Right.
So that's a challenge, is like the lack of sort of understanding about why certification is important so that we can prove that we can actually do what we say we can do. Mm-hmm. And I briefly alluded to the difficulties of people not letting you interpret with consecutive, just, not pausing in short sentences. Poor audio is an issue that I mentioned in terms of, not being able to hear properly. And I think, there's some unintentional gaslighting that can go on when people say, well, everybody else is hearing just fine. How come the interpreter isn't hearing just fine? And that comes from a lack of understanding. There's no malice behind it. There's just a lack of understanding about how much more difficult it is cognitively in that moment what the interpreter is doing, and therefore how much audio clarity makes such a huge difference. But also there's a whole thing about when people haven't really learned to properly work with interpreters, they tend to look at the interpreter and talk to the interpreter. Mm-hmm. Ask Mr. So-and-so if this, well, did she go to the bank that day? And the interpreter has to say to whoever it is, like, please, the interpreter would request, because we also speak about ourselves in the third person, right? So that it's always very clear if we are actually being the voice of the person talking or if we are speaking on our own behalf. The interpreter would request, Your Honor, that the attorney be instructed to address the witness in the first person, or whatever it is. Because that's the whole thing. We can't just add words to the record that were never said. So if you say, ask him whether he went to her house that night, and I then say, sir, the attorney wants to know if you went to her house that night. All kinds of things are now being said that are never, so did you go to her house that night in English? And ¿Fue usted a su casa esa noche? And the person, no, yo no fui a su casa. I don't say, he says that he didn't go. No,
right.
Nobody said he says. I'm now adding that to the record. So we have to be very strict about that. And and people forget, even people with years of experience working with interpreter will forget and lapse back into that. The moment that they are not on their vigilance, or that they get not a very professional interpreter, somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience in the courtrooms, they'll lapse back into it if the interpreter allows it. So it's something we have to be vigilant about. Yeah, volume. And then I've not run into this very much, if at all, because I feel like I have the respect of the bench and our administrators and the people that I work with. But sadly, I do hear stories on online forums from interpreters, sometimes in other fields too, phone interpreters or remote interpreters, even medical interpreters, who say that some people just don't respect them and they won't. And the interpreter will say, can you please speak in shorter sentences, or can you pause a second and let me interpret? And they're like, I don't care. And they just barrel ahead and seemingly unaware that if it's not interpreted, the patient isn't understanding it, or whoever, right? So sometimes that's a problem people say they run into as well, like a lack of respect for interpreters as professionals, and that we need to properly work with interpreters so that our collective mission can be accomplished. So yes.
Yeah, the whole thing breaks down as soon as they're not able to do their jobs.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are those bridges of communication, and not to mention the vicarious trauma and the stress and everything that adds also a part of the job.
I did want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. So sometimes court proceedings can be very emotionally charged. They can be very heavy. So first of all, some people might not be aware. What is vicarious trauma and how does it impact the profession?
Right. Okay. Excellent question. So vicarious trauma, right? Like when I say, oh gosh, what? You're going to Spain? I'm going to live vicariously through you. Pics, vicarious, right? So it's not something that you experienced that trauma directly. I'm not the person to whom these things happened that are being talked about in the courtroom. But because I'm hearing about them, and not only hearing them, but as an interpreter, they're coming out of my mouth, right? then so that's why we talk about vicarious trauma. It's like secondhand trauma. It's its own trauma, but in relation to somebody else's trauma, it's vicarious or secondhand, right? Firsthand trauma for you of a different nature, I guess I would call it.
Okay.
Yes. You know, and this is a hard question, Seth, to answer how to deal with this. There's all kinds of workshops that other interpreters put on for interpreters and court personnel more generally about how to handle it. And there's a lot of talk about self-care and being aware of your mental health and taking rest days and things like that. I think that's all important. To some degree, I don't know that there's any way to avoid it completely, to be honest. You know, there's some kind of professional barrier that comes up in my mind. I try when I kind of brace myself, I know I'm going into court, so that it won't hit me the same way as if I were relaxed on a Sunday afternoon on my couch and all of a sudden there's a terrible scene on television of some violent thing being done to a person that catches me off guard. So in court, like I'm braced myself. I know that this is what we're going to talk about, and I focus on being accurate and doing a good job by the people that I'm serving, which is not just people who are of limited English proficiency, because that's a misconception. Mm-hmm. We are not here for such and such person. We are here for everybody.
Right.
Unless everybody in that courtroom speaks Spanish, I'm also interpreting for every single one of those people too, in the other direction, right? So I focus on those things. And I think ultimately it may come down to just your philosophical outlook on life and how much work you've done on yourself with your own, whatever it is, unresolved traumas and uncovered things and triggers and things like that. You know, I know some interpreters that I work with have like a very strong religious foundation and some maybe don't. And it's not really about any of those things in particular, but more about how you are able to sort of self-regulate your nervous system when you become dysregulated and find some kind of philosophical outlook on life that allows you to, in some way, I guess, accept that terrible things happen to people all the time. And you know, that's hard because I don't think I've arrived myself, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody does.
That's a fair point. And you could almost look at it as like, I don't know if this could be a healthy coping way, but like the fact you're hearing these things and stating these things, kind of vicariously experiencing this trauma, it's allowing for this individual who may not otherwise be able to express this in this setting, to be heard. And it doesn't help necessarily cope with it, but it's just like you're doing really important stuff, you know?
Thank you.
And it's, it can't really be understated.
I think that that's actually a really good point. And I don't know if you've ever read the book by Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, actually called Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah, it's a really good book that was written by a Holocaust survivor back in the day, Viktor Frankl. And he talks about logotherapy, logos meaning meaning, right? Mm-hmm. Logos, like that's why every science ends in ology, like study of or the meaning of. So logotherapy for him, like the way that he says he got through the concentration camps and everything was by thinking about in the future how he was going to use these experiences to help other people. So there is a lot to that. I think if you can if you can give your experience a meaning, and this goes for any trauma victim, right? If you can, and I'm no therapist, but if you can find a meaning to give to any difficult experience, then that's going to go a very long way. I think any therapist will tell you in actually being able to heal from it and process it and integrate it. You're never going to forget it or be without it or be the same as you were before, but you can better integrate it into your psyche in a way that is going to reduce a lot of those negative effects. So I think that's a very good point you mentioned, honestly.
And thank you for articulating it so much better than I did.
No. Thanks for bringing it up because I was not thinking about that, but I think it's an excellent point. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears. A couple more things I want to cover, such as misconceptions, but also I'm curious to hear, I'm sure people will be listening to this who are interested in interpreting, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
So
we need you.
Yeah.
Join us.
Yes. So before we get to that, perhaps let's cover some misconceptions about court interpreting. You work with you've mentioned this briefly already, but you work with a lot of different professionals. There's a general lack of understanding about what court interpreters do and their role. So can you perhaps just touch on some of these misconceptions?
Yeah, I mean, so I think some of them are, as I mentioned before, that in folks who have less experience with it or who have done less reading about it or talking with an interpreter about it. I see it less and less in my life just because I've been here now for 7 years and I did freelancing for 10 years before that. So, so the people that I kind of work with on a regular basis have kind of heard it all from me at some point or another, or from one of my colleagues. But some misconceptions that you can come across are, as I mentioned before, the idea that anybody who is bilingual or says that they're bilingual, and we don't know to what degree, right, can do it just like out of the box. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying,
doesn't automatically mean you can.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to kind of train for it. You have to sort of know what you're getting into. Just like, I'm sure maybe I could be a doctor, but I'm sure not going to operate on you today, Seth.
Right.
That would not be advisable.
Right.
It would take some training to sort of grow those skills in me and tap into my natural ability or discover that I have none, in that field. So as the case may be, but there's a little bit of a process there, right? So, so that misconception about, and anybody who's bilingual can just sort of, here, you go into court. Not quite. Yeah. Or there's another misconception too. I've heard like, well, as long as we're using certified interpreters in the courtroom, but outside the courtroom, it's fine if they're not certified. I'm thinking, that's also a little sketchy to me because information that's relayed outside of the courtroom that's relevant to anything happening in the courtroom is still information that's being relayed. And you want to, I mean, I know, but it is just the reality of how it is. There's just not enough. And that's a misconception. Again, the misconception that we are talking to the interpreter and the interpreter is relaying messages. That's not the way. We are talking to each other. The interpreter is the voice of each of us. We address each other in the first person. We look at each other. I know I harp on this one a lot. Technically, it is, of course, a requirement of my profession, but I will fully admit that it comes with an emotional charge in my personal life because as the daughter of immigrant parents from Colombia, who admittedly both spoke and or speak, my dad did pass, but my mom is still alive, and English is not their first language, right? And in moments of stress, for example, at a scary doctor's appointment or something, some of those finer points of language comprehension, even for a native speaker, can sort of fly out the window along with our access to our prefrontal cortex. So I'm usually there with my mom at her doctor's appointments for the bigger things to sort of act as just like a second set of ears and whatnot. And I unfortunately sometimes notice a tendency from healthcare providers to start just looking at me and talking to me. Yeah. Because they notice that my mom has an accent or that there's a point at which she said she didn't understand something or didn't answer the question right in the right way. And I had to sort of kind of summarize it for her in Spanish or something. And then all of a sudden, it's just a subconscious thing that people do. They don't mean to be disrespectful. They don't mean to be dismissive. But all of a sudden, they're tuned into the English speaker, quote unquote, in the room, which is now me, but I'm not the patient. And I hate it when this happens. It feels to me so disrespectful to the patient, even if no disrespect is meant. And so I just come already out of the box with this entire history behind me as a child of immigrant parents. So I'm very keenly aware of when this starts happening in any kind of professional situation. And I just kind of gently remind people, please remember that you're supposed to address each other in the first person. It makes things confusing when we're addressing people in third person nouns, because now when you said, he said this, are you talking about the person you're talking to, or are you talking about the person in your story that you were talking about? Right. It causes confusions in addition to just causing an unnecessary distance between people, I think. So, I don't know if, I'm sure there's many more misconceptions that I will kick myself later when I listen to this episode and think, why didn't I say it?
You'll just have to come back on.
Right? Well, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode of I'll Allow It Nevada. We're always striving to bring you valuable insights and education, not just for judicial officers, but for anyone interested in the Nevada judiciary. If you find our content helpful or intriguing, please share your experience with your friends, families, and colleagues. Your support helps us reach a broader audience and ensures that more people can benefit from our discussions. Thank you for listening and supporting I'll Allow It Nevada. Okay, so before we move on to the next topic, I do want to hear a little bit about ethical considerations for court interpreters. So which ethical considerations do interpreters need to keep in mind during court proceedings?
Gosh. Okay. So it would, I'm sure, be impossible to list all of the things that can come up. I can tell you some things that do come up. I try to personally always never find myself alone in a room with just the person of limited English proficiency, or the LEP as we call them, because what happens is a natural human tendency of people who realize you're the only person who understands them to just start telling you things, their story in greater detail than they then later tell their attorney or whoever. I, at one point, even stopped sitting right next to people at, for example, the Jan Evans Juvenile Justice Center when the parents of detained juveniles or non-detained juveniles, as the case may be, are there who require interpretation. I sit now closer to the people speaking so that I can hear them better, sure, and see them better, at least from the side, because we're sitting in the back of the courtroom there in that context. But also something I noticed as an unintended but very welcome side effect of not sitting right next to the folks that I'm interpreting for into Spanish is that all of the little side conversations stopped, where they would used to just sit right next to me and then they would make little side comments sometimes during the proceedings. And I am ethically bound to interpret everything that I hear into the other language. So sometimes people say, no, that's not, that you're not supposed to interpret that. That was just for you. And I have to explain to people. And that was me also being less experienced and not proactively explaining to people beforehand in every scenario. Although sometimes there's not time to do it and we're all human. The interpreter should explain to people, I have to interpret everything you say out loud. So FYI, and people don't understand that. So they think that they can just have a little side conversation with me. That's not ethical. They might be revealing information. And now what do I do with that? I'm not an attorney. I'm not the judge. I'm not anything. I have to say it. And now I'm stuck with that, or being in the same room as somebody alone. Ethical considerations to consider. And some people, there's divided opinions about this one, but if an interpreter has interpreted for one side versus the other in a criminal matter, technically we are officers of the court. We are neutral and impartial. But some people still think and say, if you've been exposed to private attorney-client conversations on one side of it, and now you're going to be interpreting for a private victim's advocate and, complaining witness conversations on the other side of it, as a human being whose brain has heard information, of necessity, you have some kind of, if not bias in that way, as in for or against the specific person, more just like the context. It's like the same reason why we read the documents when we can before a case, right? So that we have a context for it. Some people say, some interpreters even say, you can't unring a bell that's been rung. So when you hear certain kinds of things, that there's certain connotations that are come up in your mind based on what you were exposed to previously in that same case or others. So some people say we shouldn't interpret for both sides, for example. Or, if we're interpreting for the defendant, now we have to interpret for a witness. I don't know where I fall on that, Seth. I think there's a lot to be said for both things. We are neutral, and I want us to be seen as that because we are, and we are officers of the court. But we're also human, and if there is anything neurologically valid about saying this, hey, will it bias the interpretation I give, the words that are now coming out of somebody else's mouth because I heard different things about this story before in private? I can't say, but that would be an ethical consideration, Right. Gosh, I'm sure there's a bunch of other things I may not be thinking about. Stuff comes up, for example, when you're on a roll as part of a stacked docket, oftentimes, judges, they want to get through as many cases efficiently as they can. They'll start allowing counsel and, the representative from the Division of Parole and Probation or whoever to state their appearances on the record. But in the meantime, the shackled inmate is still just barely starting to make his or her way from the back of the courtroom. I haven't set them up. So more recently, I've started to just request permission from the judges. Your Honor, may the interpreter have a moment to set the defendant up with the interpretation equipment before appearances are made on the record. And the judges are very gracious and they understand and they say, of course, sometimes they'll forget because, not every case is an interpreter case. So muscle memory, right? But there's a lot of goodwill there. But that's an ethical thing for me personally. Well, not for me personally, for everybody, but I'm just saying it's something that I've become aware of personally over time that, technically a person who doesn't speak English and has requested an interpreter has the right to hear everything that's being said about their case. Everything, because the English speaker shackled making his or her way from the back of the room as this is happening is hearing it. Right. Is hearing it in English, which is a language he or she understands. The Spanish speaker or other language speaker is not. So now they're up there. They didn't really hear who's who. I mean, I don't know if it'll make a difference or not, but that's not on me to decide. Right. Or I've been asked by attorneys sometimes who don't know any better or other people, can you just go over this document with my client and actually you don't have to really read the whole thing because we don't have a lot of time, but just summarize like the main points, like the important ones. And I have to say, counsel, as an interpreter, I cannot make those decisions of what are the main points or the important points. That's actually at this point now a legal decision. And I cannot be liable for choosing, you know what I mean?
Deciding what the main points are.
Right. Yeah. That's not for me to decide. And so, or I've been asked, Ms. Escobar, this guilty plea memorandum was already read to my client in Spanish by my Spanish-speaking paralegal or by a different certified interpreter over the webcam, whatever it is. But they didn't have a chance to sign it. Can you just sign it? And I have to say, counsel, unfortunately, I cannot sign this document as having been the interpreter who read it, who sight translated it rather, unless I did it. Well, can we just do a summary? I have to, if I'm signing that and I don't know if everybody's as much of a stickler for this, Seth, but I am, because that's my name now in that record.
Right.
And because I owe it to that person, I have no idea. I trust my colleagues, certainly, and it's certainly in no way a disparagement to any of our fantastic Spanish-speaking colleagues in the community who are not interpreters, but are just helping, with their language skills in every capacity that they can as paralegals or everything else. But if I'm putting my name on, but then they needed to have signed it, right?
Yeah.
If I put my name on it, that means I did it. And I did it to my own standards, which I may not be God's gift to interpretation or whatever, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. But at least if I put my name on it, I know that I did my best and that I really did it.
Right.
So that's another ethical thing, I think,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It sounds like ethical considerations. I mean, it's very relevant to any aspect of the court. So
Sure.
that could be a whole nother episode.
It could. And also don't misrepresent your credentials. That's the other one too. Sometimes people get caught. I've never known anybody who did this, but I've heard people get caught saying that they're certified when they're not. That's a huge ethical breach. We have an entire code of ethics. We have to interpret everything accurately. I should have started with that. The code of ethics of interpreters. You have to interpret everything accurately, omit nothing, add nothing. You have to say if you are unable to do your job because of some limitation. There's a whole thing. The AOC has one online, the NAJIT, the National Association of Judiciary Interpreters and Translators, has one. And they're both, there's a series of like 10 or more tenets of what the code of ethics of interpreters is. And we're bound to secrecy. We do not speak about our cases. All of these things are the ethical considerations of interpreters because people are putting all their trust in us.
Right.
And we are an extra person now in that court process that wouldn't even be there. So we don't have the right to talk about it or interfere in any way. We're just supposed to be the voice, right?
Right.
Yeah. So code of ethics.
Okay. So moving on from ethical considerations, however, we could talk about it forever. I did want to ask, kind of touching back on just the general lack of understanding, I think, expanding on that a little bit, how can attorneys, judges, and court staff work effectively with interpreters to ensure, smooth operations?
I think
proceedings?
Number one is recognizing that if everybody at a meeting has a printout of the agenda, so to speak, the interpreter gets one too. And I'm being metaphorical here, but if all of the attorneys and all the staff are getting a copy of the printed out jury instructions or of whatever it is, that the interpreter should be taken into account. I think, again, like if we're doing simultaneous interpretation, please be mindful of the speed that you're speaking at.
Right.
I'm so flattered that some people think that I am a robot. I know that they don't really. I think they're just in the zone, right? And I said myself, I'm a fast talker. But we are not machines. Like it is a very, very challenging thing. And if there's any interest in the client understanding what is being said and in actually doing justice and not just sort of going through motions of, well, there's an interpreter there, so something's happening. And I mean, and I would do this every day, right? But I have colleagues who work in languages other than Spanish that are more rare, and they're kind of all over the country and in the world and all over the place, medical, court, HR meetings, whatever. And not all of them are going to be very fast because they don't do it every day. They do other jobs too, because it's not enough work in just that one language for them to just do that. So you have to be mindful, like the interpreters, not everybody can keep up with that pace either. So that's a good thing that can ensure more smoothly is like the pace of how fast you're talking. If we're doing consecutive again, like please allow us to interpret, like please do not just say these super long things and then expect us to and then people get impatient. If you spoke for 5 minutes, we're going to speak for 5 minutes at least,
right.
And we might, miss things even if we try very hard, and interpreter placement, things like that, just awareness. sometimes like a courtroom could get redesigned or something. And everybody's taken into consideration, like, where will the court clerk sit? I mean, this happened during the pandemic, right? Like, things got redesigned and created and things. Everybody like has a seat. Everybody has a place. And then the interpreter comes in and like, oh,
where do I go?
Yeah. I've been in a situation where a poor court clerk had to like grab a very low coffee table and stack it high with like, I don't remember what they were, binders or notebooks or something. And, you know, and steal a microphone from somebody else to give it to me, because there had been at no point had anybody in the redesign of this courtroom or creation of this courtroom had even considered interpreters.
Right.
Even the law clerk, even everybody had like their own little station and placement. There was supposed to be social distancing. I got wedged in between where the jury was and where like the evidence screen was. So that's the thing. Like, we can just remember that we exist. And also for courts, I have access to all the documents here through, or not all of them, but through our internal system. But for most interpreters, it's a freelance profession. So right. I think something that helps very much is like providing documents in advance. Interpreters should know to ask for them, and courts should be very proactive in providing them as well. Allow them the chance to properly prepare for the assignment and not just come in cold to interpret about who knows what the crime even was or the technical vocabulary. So allow people to do their job. Make sure that your microphone, I hope you have microphones. I know every courtroom is different. It is so hard. I used to get headaches every week and sometimes daily before the installation of our microphones after the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big proponent of that. It is so hard to, especially when doing simultaneous in those courtrooms with the acoustics, whether they're echoey or just very dry, as we call it in the music world, not enough resonance. It's so hard to hear, especially over the sound of your own voice as you're simultaneously interpreting. For those of you who have the budget and can provide it, and interpretation equipment is excellent. Williams Sound is a leader in the industry, but there's other kinds that are available. And a lot of freelancers just buy their own sets, honestly. They kind of travel with that, their own interpretation equipment, which helps. If you're doing remote hearings on Zoom, and I know some people never actually went that route, and some people maybe just fell out of it. We still do a lot of our family court stuff here that way, and a lot of hybrid hearings. Please, like, test your sound. Make sure you have a good microphone. I can guarantee you that 9 times out of 10, the built-in microphone on your webcam or your device is not good enough. Those are what we call omnidirectional. They're designed to pick up sounds from all directions. That's not the crystal clear quality of sound you need for a speaker. Mm-hmm. And so have directional, unidirectional or cardioid microphones. There's some cheap ones available on Amazon. I can't tell you how many emails personally to like private practice attorneys, our own judges and everything, trying to get everybody to get the good microphones in our own Zoom rooms here. Right. Have good audio, be aware, give the interpreter time to set up, just take into account that it's a person doing a very difficult job. And like I said, I'm pretty fortunate where I work and the people I work with. But, it's just important to keep these things in mind. Right. We're not trying to be difficult if we ask for a repetition or if we ask you to slow down or speak into the microphone or have a microphone or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's just we need to be able to do our job, which is so that we can all do our collective job of ensuring language access to justice. So long-winded, but I probably I'll come up with more along the way.
Yeah, we should probably start wrapping this up, but I could talk about court interpreting all day. So we'll have to touch base again at a later time. But before we do wrap this up, I did want to ask, because you mentioned already there is a shortage of court interpreters throughout the state. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there are people who are listening who are just interested in this profession. Do you have any advice you would give to someone who is interested in this profession?
Sure. I think there's a few different things you can do. One of the things that you can do is come to the court. Mm-hmm. You can come in person, and also with the Second Judicial District Court. If you go to Washoe Courts, that's plural, washoecourts with an S.com/online hearings, or just click on, online hearings when you get to washoecourts.com. You have a list of basically links to the Zoom hearings. And as long as they're public, and nothing sealed or anything like that, which I can't imagine would be on there then if it were, you can watch virtual hearings. Just tell them you're an interpreter in training and who is a courtroom observer. We get them all the time for different languages. Or come in person. We have our criminal dockets every day starting at 9:00 in some department or another, and that's all on the website. You go to washoecourts.com, click on judges, and you'll see the calendar per department number for the judges of general jurisdiction, which includes criminal and civil. And, and then we have family court and the juvenile court. So actually the juvenile court's not under because we have a court master, but the link is on there for Zoom for hybrid hearings. Observe and also practice and do evaluation of yourself. Sort of try to gauge where you're at. Come to the court. Another colleague of mine, actually, I will mention her by name. I hope she doesn't mind. Natalia Cardillo is the full-time, she's my counterpart at Reno Justice Court across the street. And she says some advice she gives to aspiring interpreters who come to shadow her or whatnot is go to the court and sit in there and bring a little notebook with you and write down anything you didn't understand, like any vocabulary or whatever. I guess it could be in either English or the other language. And then, and just that gives you an idea where you are, right? How much stuff do you actually already know vocabulary wise and how much do you not? And I say also do this outside of court. Like if you want to test your skills, try turning on the radio or watching something on Netflix or whatever and start interpreting. Just start interpreting what they're saying. If you can, record yourself, even better, to hear where the awkward pauses are or where you struggle to find a word or to convert an idiomatic expression into something equivalent. Do that and evaluate yourself where you are. Where are your strong points? What are your weak points? There are, for the oral exam, for example, I think it's the National Center for State Courts they have online like a list of bullet points of where people most commonly fail on the oral exam, and language interference is on there and things like that. Kind of just sort of analyze yourself, read a lot in both or all of your working languages to acquire a depth and breadth of vocabulary, because it's going to be coming from all fields and all angles. And just don't go into it blindfolded, whether or not you learned it as a kid or not. I know people who started learning their second language at age 16 and now they're federal interpreters and everything and getting certified in a third language. So it is possible, but just get into it and do some practice tests. There's some available for free online as well. All kinds of stuff.
Amazing. I know there's quite a few resources out there for those who are interested. And I remember sharing those with people when I was working in this department at the AOC. Just different resources. People can kind of dip their toes into the profession and see what it's all about. And
a lot of people contact me directly by email, and I can send you what I have that I've compiled, like with tips and tricks too. So I don't know if that's an okay thing to share my email on the podcast or if not.
If it's okay, if you're comfortable with it, that's fine.
Sure. So my email, you can reach me at Jessica, that's JES as in Sam, another S, ICA .Escobar, ES as in Sam, COB as in boy, AR at Washoe Courts. Again, that's courts with an S at the end. And that's WASHOE courts.us. This time it's not .com like our website, .us for the email. And just say, hey, I listened to your podcast and I am actually looking to be an interpreter. Can you send me some of those resources you mentioned? And I'll just send you a email back with a bunch of attached documents they're not like, they're not super polished or anything. They're just me sitting at my computer writing down answers to commonly asked questions with like sets of links that hopefully are, mostly still alive because I check them periodically of places where you can find practice tests or classes that you could take online or whatever, it's just my little, it's nothing major, but it's, and you can get on my email list too if you want. And I send out resources periodically as I have time or ability to find new things that might help, like online dictionaries, whatever,
Awesome. So, and in case anyone missed it, I'll go ahead and put your email address in the description so people can access it there as well.
Thank you, Seth.
Amazing.
Yes, we want to help get as many people into this profession as we can.
Absolutely.
With the caveat that there's not a lot of full-time jobs available in it, but you can make a very nice living if you're good about like finding clients and across different, courts and types of things and doing depositions. Like get your name out there. And if you get certified, your name and contact info does get added to a list. And you get people. Yes, exactly. So, but I just don't want people to think, oh, I'm going to land a nice, cushy full-time job with. No, I mean, those are rare. Those are, I know of 3, here in Reno, but you can make it work as a freelancer. And I have, and I know colleagues who do. So most of us are actually, just not me right now at this moment.
Okay. So Jessica, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you. I hope to feature your expertise again in the future. And Thanks again for taking the time to speak with me and sharing your insights with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Seth. It's been an honor and a pleasure speaking with you. I'm sure there was a lot more that could be said about it, but hopefully we hit up some of the key points for people, A
great overview. Absolutely.
Thank you for your excellent questions. Got me talking. Thank you again.
A heartfelt appreciation to our guest and to everyone who has tuned in to this episode. Before we wrap up, here are a couple of quick, important reminders. For continuing legal education credit, be sure to complete a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we welcome your input. Please email them to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. We now have a topic suggestion form now available in the description. Please take a moment to fill it out if you have any suggestions. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of I'll Allow It, Nevada. This is Seth Easley signing off. Take care, Nevada.